so much for undocumented objects found deliberately concealed in buildings. I work in museums, so I'm going to be talking about museum collections, but different ways in which English amulets in museum collections have been concealed and revealed. So there's about 1,700 English charms and amulets I found tucked away in museum collections. And until a recent revival of interest in the sort of 21st century, most of these have been relegated to stores since the middle of the 20th century. So the sorts of things I'm talking about. Hagstones hung at the doors to guard against witchcraft, moles' feet kept in your pocket to fight cramp, or commercially made silver charms against bad luck. But why and when and by who were those things revealed and concealed? Why were they put in museums? And can we learn anything from them about most people's interest, which is deliberately concealed objects? So I'm going to begin by looking at the distribution of collections and who collected them. Those are a fairly random selection of things from a number of different museums. So my own interest in that subject began in 1999-2000 when I was working with the anthropology collections in the Cambridge Archaeology and Anthropology Museum, and came across the old cabinet in the stores known as Haddon's Folklore Cabinet. Haddon being an anthropologist. 30 little drawers and a glass vitrine on top filled with 300 little charms and amulets from all over the world. And that had been in the stores for some time. And yeah, I wondered why it had been in the stores for some time and why nobody liked the English collections. So, yeah, in contrast to most anthropology museums and the museum's collections as a whole, the emphasis of the cabinet is on European and British material. And the anthropologist, Alfred Court Haddon, is one of the museum's early curators, but he's more famous as a field worker in New Guinea and the Torres Straits for making some of the first ethnographic films and being one of the first field anthropologists. But before he got into that, he was involved in a UK ethnographic survey that never came to fruition and in anthropological work in the Aran Islands off the west coast of Ireland. And he also wrote a book called Magic and Fetishism, corresponding to the collections in the cabinet, which is sort of fairly classic early anthropology work. In 2014, I got round to conducting a more systematic survey of modern era English amulets in museums, and I found about, as I said, 1,700 in about 17 different institutions. And if you want to read the survey, it's in that book, which several other people here contribute to, I think. Don't need to read all that. This is a table. Obviously, the physical evidence found in the collections is far from objective. That table just shows that this is where the amulets are from. I don't even know if you can read it, but it just shows that most of over 400 of them are from London, 300 odd from England unprovenanced, 200 odd from the northeast, down to 14 from the northwest. So very much dependent on the interests of the institutions and the collectors, what we find in museums. So my survey confirmed that all of the major collections of English charms and amulets seem to have been amassed by a relatively small network of individuals over a short period of time during the early days of anthropology and folklore as academic disciplines in the late 19th and early 20th century. At a time when social science museums were being founded. And at that time, the English and British material was combed for the theory of survivals of obsolescent beliefs and practices, and compared through social evolutionary theories with material from the rest of the world, especially Britain's colonies. So that's the context. This 19th and 20th century context, when sort of the only time when these sort of material were collected and put in museums. By contrast, very few examples of English material magic popular magic entered museums before or after that time period. And by extension, the representation of that sort of magic is quite sparsely represented in museums. We don't have solid dates for many of the objects, but most of them were collected from the people who used them or who remembered their predecessors using them. You can't read that either. There's not too many tables. We'll get back onto nice things. So at one end of the scale of institutional collecting, we have the largest systematic series of magical artefacts, which is at the Pitt Rivers Museum, and everybody who's been there will have seen about a dozen cabinets with these things in from all over the world. The collection actually includes over 500 things from England. The second largest collection is a lesser-known institution, the Scarborough Museums, which has over 300 English charms. And the third then is the Museum of Witchcraft in Boscastle. At the other end of the scale, there's not many objects in older institutions that predate that folklore collecting phase. The Ashmolean and the British Museum have only got a handful of these things. It was in fact General Pitt Rivers himself, as far as I can see, who made the first actual public display of popular superstitions at the Bethnal Green Museum in the 1870s, which later became part of the V&A. Pitt Rivers had been collecting those things since the 1850s, inspired by the Great Exhibition. The Folklore Society was set up soon afterwards, in 1878, and its members campaigned for the foundation of a British folk museum, which also never happened. And that's a stone collected by. Oh, I've just gone through the slide. Stone. I'm pressing the wrong button. A stone collected by Pitt Rivers, saying who he collected it from and so on his own personal estate. And then the General's collection in 1884 became part of the founding collection of the Pitt Rivers Museum. Underneath the direction of Edward Bernard Tyler, who was, like James George Fraser, magic was a big part of his theoretical basis, but Tyler was more into things as material evidence. Tyler thought that magic was the foundation of all religion and mythology, and material culture. Human culture is based on our physical experience of the world, so he collected material evidence for his theories that went into the Pitt Rivers Museum. But that collection has continued to grow under the next curator, Henry Balfour, until today, when only 2% of the objects on display are from Pitt Rivers' early collection. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with that Pitt Rivers display. The armchair curators and theorists mentioned above often brought together the collections of amateur field collectors. Museums acquired English amulets from more than 80 named individuals, in addition to their original makers, who are rarely known, so there's not much information about the people who used these things, really. And a lot of the field collectors were also curators and academics. And the rest of the people involved remain obscure. Which the well-known amateur folk artist Edward Lovett was the most prolific collector, and around the time of the First World War he flooded museum collections around the country with mass-produced charms, among other things, many of which had been used by First World War soldiers, so his collections sort of skew the graphs a bit, and his collections are in at least 16 different museums. I mentioned the Scarborough, that's Haddon top left, Lovett top right, Clark of Scarborough bottom left, who I'm going to mention in a minute, and Cecil Williamson on the bottom right of the Museum of Witchcraft. The biggest intact collection was made by a lesser-known enthusiast, William James Clark, a Scarborough natural historian. There he is with the squid named after him, and an honorary curator of the Scarborough Museum. His correspondence and scrapbooks show that he was heavily influenced by Lovett, and anyway, that's just a picture of a published picture of some of Lovett's collection on the left, and some things that I found in Clark's collection on the right. So you can see there's a real tradition of what you collect. My survey deliberately excluded undocumented concealed objects, but we can make comparisons. So Edward Lovett was collecting shoes and shoe lore, including commercial representations. 3 shoes collected in London by Lovett, which are now in the Coombe Museum, invite particular comparison with concealed objects. I don't have slides of those, these are just some of Lovett's shoes. The ones I'm mentioning are a baby's or miniature shoe nailed to a wall for good luck, a child's shoe popularly known as the golden slipper, usually hung near the fireplace as a charm for good luck and riches, and a lady's or girl's slipper hung up near a fireplace for luck. And Lovett was collecting and writing about those long before Merrifield, so 50 years before Merrifield wrote his book, or 70 years before Merrifield wrote his book, and before June, sometime before June Swan started thinking about them in the Northampton Museum. But funnily enough, the concealed objects just don't appear in early museum collections. They don't very much. They don't appear in the early Folklore Society collections. They didn't really start getting collected until later on. I'm just going to do an overview of my what I found in the survey. So the physical forms of the amulets, can invite comparison with what is concealed, because these are portable amulets that were not concealed. All sorts of materials, natural objects, mineral, vegetable and animal and human, modified natural objects, or those incorporated into assemblages, such as the whole stone with the key attached. Artefacts originally made for other purposes, like nails and pins and screws. Items handmade as amulets, including trench-arch charms from the First World War, and artefacts mass-produced as charms, like your silver lucky charms, and written charms. Stones with or without holes were the natural objects that were most frequently collected, or the sort of thing that most often goes into museum collections. Those are different materials. So these, the last one was materials. This is general terms. Amulets were expected to accentuate the positive, that is to bring health or love or luck, or to attract specific benefits such as wealth, or to eliminate the negative, that is to protect against sickness, infertility, teething, accidents, death, nightmares, or witchcraft. Just over a quarter, over 400 of them are just simply for luck, and most of those are mass-produced charms collected by Lovett. Other than simply for luck, the power most frequently attributed to the amulets in museums was the prevention or cure of specific ailments, and just over 20% of the things in museums are for those purposes. We've got, I don't know if you can read the writing there, that says top right, potato carried to ward off rheumatism, bottom right, notched elder twig to cure warts, in the middle, stone cured for toothache. I can't read the other ones from here. Again, out of those amulets used for healing, this table shows that the most frequent of these are for cramp, followed by rheumatism, toothache, colds, teething, fits or epilepsy, and warts. More than 500 more of the things I found are for protection against a variety of other perils, including those to keep soldiers safe in warfare, against witchcraft, accidents and being struck by lightning, those for the protection of agricultural animals, and against the evil eye, which tend to be imported things from Europe, or things that were used by Europeans living in Britain. Finally, we have amulets said to attract specific benefits, from mass-produced promises of long life and prosperity to a good catch for fishermen or lucky gambling. While a lot of amulets were intended to protect against witchcraft, there were 61 of those in my list. Those include whole stones, pierced animal hearts, and dried frogs in a bag. Only 8 of them were specifically targeted at countering witchcraft by harming the witch, and those are only one sort, and that's the animal hearts pierced with nails, pins and thorns. That says sheep's heart stuck with pins, that's Pitt Rivers one, I think. The source of the power of the amulets. In some instances, there we are, there's a museum of witchcraft display. The Christian god is thought to be the source of the good fortune, but in the majority of cases, the source of the amulet's power is not clear. Possibly the people who use them weren't particularly thinking about where the power comes from. And that slide shows soldiers' charms from the Somme and a museum of witchcraft display which shows how Catholicism has continually been associated with magic for historical reasons, largely to do with its material nature, I think. Very little is... Oh, that's good. The clock there is just behind the banner. Very little is recorded about the original users, who the objects were collected from. Personal names are who they collected from are only associated with a small number of the objects, because they were just being collected as exemplars of a sort of academic theory. The ones that do have names on them some of them are shown here. On the left is one worn as a preservative against smallpox by John Franklin of Sydney. That's as much as it says. And on the right, W. Hockliffe, male driver on the Sydney to Cambridge route, wore that for protection against amulets. See if I can see they both hold stones on strings. Finally, what methods we use to activate the amulets. We've got hints of that in about 700 cases. Most of them were kept on or about the person. Over 250 were worn, some in specific ways, around the neck in a hat band, hat or tunic next to the skin, around the finger or leg or under clothing. A lot of it is jewellery. Other amulets were hung around the necks of cows or other livestock, and more than 200 of them are specified as having been carried, many in the pocket, purse or bag. Others were kept around the home or in the workplace. Some were hung or secured, most commonly on or near a door or bed, under the pillow, on a bedstead, in the bedroom. Others on windowsills and mantelpieces, near windows and fireplaces, in chimneys, on hearths and railings. Some were hung on or nailed to a wall or from a beam. As well as in homes, amulets were used in stables and farm buildings, gardens, markets and churches, tucked into keyholes and hidden in attics. They were also found on vehicles, costers, barrows and vans, and on beasts of burden. On boats, they were nailed to masts and rudders or stuck into fishing floats. So you've got context there for all the different ways that things were used that were not hidden behind walls. So in contrast to the ritual preconditions and postconditions that Jonathan Roper specifies for use with written charms, we've only got a few hints at the rituals required to activate these personal amulets. Some of them said to have been some of them bent, rubbed, stolen, thrown away, sat upon, pierced or wrapped. Spat upon, sorry. Some amulets were activated by their use on specific occasions in the calendar or life cycle. And all of those things are small rituals by which the user could activate the objects themselves, rather than recoursing to a coming personal priest. So this is just an example of a collection. That's the remaining collection of Herbert Tom's, curator, early 20th century curator of what is now the Brighton Museum and Art Gallery. Tom's collected about 30 fossil stones and other objects used as amulets in his local rural Sussex. They're all part of the same gang. He trained under General Pitt Rivers, and he trained Ralph Merrifield in return as his assistant. So you've got a really very short genealogy there. Tom's work stands out because he took a more anthropological approach, meticulously documenting the objects that he gathered. In this stone, it's almost completely covered in label text, so you can see it's a specimen and not a beautiful thing. He also photographed and recorded the names of the people he collected from, as well as noting the powers that they attributed to their objects. So he was sort of much closer to the people than a lot of the more institutional collectors. Tom's made 2 albums to document his collection. And that slide shows the page for the first lucky stone seen by HST, Herbert Samuel Toms, hanging in Sussex. So he went around and met villagers. I think it's first spotted one when he was, and even used one actually when he was a child. The notes on the right-hand side record the address where the stone was found. Note that it was hanging on horseshoe on left side of front door, and then his notes were accompanied by photographs, the name of its owner and how he had obtained it, and the size of the stone. So all very fabulously catalogued. What we don't know is whether Tom's coverage of the use of fossils, stones and other objects as charms in Sussex was comprehensive. His informants seem to have willingly imparted information about and parted with some of the objects, whilst deciding to keep others. Some of them appear in photographs and not in his collection. And we don't know whether they also concealed other things in their walls, or their pockets, or their minds. We've just got the things that are on display. To conclude, we've seen concealment and revelation operate on a number of levels here. How things are concealed and revealed by museums and by the people who use them. And by comparing portable charms found in early ethnographic collections with deliberately concealed objects, hopefully we can enhance our understanding of both. It also seems reasonable to suppose that objects found concealed in buildings, given the recurrent nature of the dangers that the portable amulets were put to, were used to protect people, the building's inhabitants, from a similar range of perils, notably lightning, theft, illness, and the various consequences of witchcraft and overlooking, the most popular uses for the amulets. There are differences, however. The fossils and stones and horseshoes that Tom's recorded will publicly display the visible spaces such as windowsills and doorways, and obviously some of the ritual marks we've been talking about were as well. Not all charms had to be hidden to render them effective. Now, according to Frederick Elworthy, the famous writer about the evil eye, amulets were conspicuously displayed to fascinate, and they were designed to attract attention and divert the attention of the malevolent gaze, as John was talking about earlier. So in different circumstances, concealment and revelation are both magically efficacious. But yeah, what are the similarities and differences or links between the two? Thank you.